What do you call someone that's only kind of from Great Britain?
What?
British. So, but do you want to know what Great Britain's biggest export is?
What?
Independence Days.
Welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border Ecommerce podcast. And Aaron, actually, before we dive into today's subject, which is going to be importing and selling into the UK, it's going to be fun. I want a shout out to all those people leaving our fans out there. Okay, I'm starting to see a lot of reviews, a lot of comments, and there's different personalities out there. There's the ones that. I think you were trying to describe it to me earlier. You know, those, the people that are perfectionists, or no, that's the wrong word. Like, how would you describe some of the people that we try to explain when we try to make things simple? What do they try to do?
Well, they have the mindset they want to find and create problems to justify their own existence instead of just trying to solve problems for people and only talk to the things that are relevant. So sometimes you kind of get that police officer mindset, which honestly is understandable and needed in certain jobs in the industry. But then when it comes to giving practical advice for e-commerce companies, selling, and you've got to talk about the meat and potatoes of things that matter and leave all the fringe things out that are exciting and unique and fun to banter about. Sometimes you got to leave that out and really just talk about the core things that really matter.
I sum this up as like bureaucracy, lawyers, brokers. Okay, you know, there's these type of personalities, and some in that realm are able to simplify and say, okay, yeah, an e-commerce shipment is different, right? But anyway, we love the comments.
Absolutely,
appreciate the fans. The haters and the love and the ones that love us. It's great.
I learned to accept a long time ago that I'm not perfect, so keep the comments, good and bad, coming.
Yeah. So if we say tax instead of VAT,
we're talking about the T in VAT.
Oh, is there a T? What does the T stand for?
Tax.
Oh,
yeah. GST. The T stands for tax.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that we have our the sheriffs out there.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
Okay. All right. Hey, UK. What are some of your thoughts on the United Kingdom?
Well, my heritage.
Oh,
for one, like both sides of my family line. I mean, we go straight back to England. So this hits home for me, even though it's been generations since my family's come here to America. You know, this is my roots now. So I'm excited to talk about this one. But I wanted to ask you a question. What do you like? I'm really full blooded. You know, coming British. Right? If I go back far enough. But what do you call someone that's only kind of from Great Britain?
What?
British. So, but do you want to know what Great Britain's biggest export is?
What?
Independence Days.
Yes. All right. This is a $3 trillion market.
Yes.
And a big percentage that must be Independence Day exports. Okay.
Absolutely. No, this will be a good one. Huge market.
Yep.
A lot of people ready to spend
67
money.
million of them.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So something interesting is as you're trying to assess if you're going to sell there, if you're already selling internationally into Canada or whatever, on average, usually about 9 to 10% of international sales of the customers inside the United States anyway, their volume's going into the UK. It's a substantial number. But you know, it's gotten a little bit more difficult once Brexit hit.
Yes.
So before we dive, actually, yeah, I have a comment on Brexit. So I'm on Twitter and listening to one of my idols on there, William Shatner, and he sells online, and his comments were, "I'm turning off selling into the UK because of all this tax crap." And he's like, "I'm done, I'm not doing it." And he's ranting. There were a lot of threads like that when Brexit occurred. So what happened with Brexit and why has it impacted e-commerce so much?
Oh, geez. Okay. There's a few things to unpack there because there's a lot of things that were all happening around the same time period. But to recap, Brexit was simply the UK saying we're going to go it alone, and we're now going to move out of the EU from a market perspective, which means prior to that, UK to other EU countries was like shipping inside the US here, right? From state to state. Like it wasn't
the commerce was free flowing.
It wasn't really a cross-border move. It was simple. It was easy to go from Germany to the UK, etc.
They just had to take care of tax like we do between states.
Yep. And the UK was a huge part of the EU's economy, which is actually a big catalyst for why they wanted to leave. But it was a great market for everyone to sell into. And then when Brexit happened, all of a sudden, all of these new barriers came up for sellers in the EU trying to sell into the UK and vice versa.
Because the UK is now applying tariffs to Europe.
It's just like cross-border.
It's cross-border.
There's customs clearance, all these things that are happening that were never happening before. So there's a lot of sellers inside of that EU market that didn't really sell cross-border outside of that. So everything felt domestic to them. Now one of their biggest countries has all these extra steps and barriers to selling into. So that added some complexity. At the same time, the UK was rolled out there. This came out around the same time of IOS. They're within 6 months of each other. But their low value tax law, which then put a burden on companies to get registered and remit tax.
But they put a duty de minimis in too, right? Of 135 pounds. That remained.
Yep, that stayed there.
Yeah. So they kept it simple, right? This is simple.
Yeah. Sure. Now you actually have to fill out a commercial invoice. You have to do all sorts of things that you never really had to do before. But
okay. So but the tax side, how is this different? The UK VAT, right? 20% VAT. How is it different than some of the other low value tax laws out there?
So this is where we had that one podcast kind of did a high level overview of them all. If I remember right, what we talked about with the UK was they kept it simple in some ways where they just said, hey, anything under 135 British pounds, we're going to now put it on the retailer, wherever they're at in the world. The burden's on you now to collect and remit that tax to us. We're not going to collect it as it clears customs. Sounds good, right?
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Except for now it puts a burden on a retailer having to sell into
But this
UK.
worked into Australia and some other places.
Yeah. The one step they missed, though, was making it simple. So if you look at Australia, New Zealand, some of the other ones, they actually created a whole simplified process for registering and remitting tax. Now, it might be limited in what it can do, like reclaiming VAT and all those types of things. Like it was like, no, we'll set up a really simplified process for you to just send us money and then you're off and running, right? You sign up online, takes a few minutes, you got to manage it and do all of that, but it's fairly straightforward. The UK, on the other hand, just use their current existing registration processes that they have for local businesses and just impose that on anybody wanting to sell low value goods into the UK. So overnight, they changed it to now the burden is on you as a retailer, and we're not going to make it simple for you. You got to go through the same process as any UK business does, which honestly is a pain in the butt. And when you fill out the forms, the language they use, the terminology they use is not familiar to anybody outside the UK. So you're wondering what some of the words even mean. It was clunky, difficult. And then the other thing is everybody else put in a selling threshold. So it's like, we're not going to put this burden on you small retailers. We're going to put a threshold. You got to sell a certain amount of goods into our country before you even need to worry about it. And we'll make it simple for you.
Everybody has to register.
In the UK, every single company, big or small, that wants to sell, send shipments that are under 135 pounds. That's not weight, that's currency, right? And we're not going to make it simple for you.
Well, I remember when this first came out, we had retailers that would Zonos Hello, which is our product that will display, to the customer how much, what the VAT's going to be, when they can expect to pay duty, blah, blah, blah. And when it was under 135 pounds, they'd say, you have to spend 135 pounds or more. And they would turn off sales, and we would turn off sales. We wouldn't quote anything unless it went over that threshold.
Yep. Yeah.
They would
Honestly,
reject low
I
value
was
sales.
like, I don't even want to deal with
No.
the low value sales anymore, so I'm just not going
And
to.
it's still a relevant strategy for anyone that's kind of doing
Sure.
the DIY, strategy right now.
Sure.
Whereas you can come to Zonos or something, and the compliance, we manage the entire compliance. It's under our ID.
But in the beginning, when we were trying to figure out how to navigate this, we were in the same boat going, okay.
Oh, yeah.
And we understood it. So we actually built the tools to allow people to do this. And then that's when we decided, okay, we've got to come up with, that's not a good long-term strategy. And so we had to create the solutions where we could support our customers for all value.
Well, look, I never thought we were going to be a tax company. So when it first came out, I was a bit resistant to.
Sure.
I'm like, this isn't our thing. We don't do the U.S. sales tax at the time, which we do a lot of that now. So why would we all of a sudden start doing sales tax around the world? And I was definitely strong-armed into it by governments.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, okay. You talked about the registration process. It's definitely William Shatner went through that, right? So that's why he was so upset. Let's talk about shipping into the UK now. So for the paperwork, you now have to list that UK VAT number on your paperwork, correct? And then what if every once in a while I get a question from customers that are outside of the UK and outside of Europe that they wonder, do they need an EORI number?
No.
No.
Not unless you're actually becoming the importer and stuff
Right.
like that. The EORI numbers for, if you're in the UK shipping out or in the EU shipping out, that's the entity in there. But if you're just shipping to consumers, you don't need to worry about an EORI number.
So all of our customers in Europe, they already know what the EORI number is. They know how to handle it and put it on there. Everyone outside of there, you pretty much don't have to worry about it. Now, before we dive into the carriers and shipping into the UK, the express carriers, the DHL, UPS, FedEx, I want to talk about the post a little bit. So there's UK is interesting because the Royal Mail Group has Royal Mail as an entity, and then they have Parcel Force, and they're both posts, and they handle different things. Royal Mail is usually lower value letter type stuff, smaller parcels, and then Parcel Force is handling higher value stuff. But the reason I want to bring up the post today in this podcast is it is currently out of the US. Zonos is the only company that can help facilitate a DDP shipment from the United States into the UK with Royal Mail. And so that's us. That's the program, we've been working on with the United States Postal Service. So anyone that's interested in learning more about that, let us know. One of the great things about that is the carrier fees. So what I don't know if you remember, what's the Royal Mail fee publish rate, and then what is it now if you're shipping through this program?
£12 is the published rate. So that is, when the duty and tax gets assessed, they need to collect. They tack on an extra £12 to that. Through that PDDP offering, it's £1. Huge savings.
Huge savings. Because right now, if you just send a DDU and you're doing post, you're going to save your customer £11 working with us if you're doing just USPS outbound.
Yep.
So it's anyways, we're really excited about that program. Rolled it out this year. We're continuing to roll out program. We have it for Canada. We talked about this, and obviously when it's a low value, when it's under 135 GBP, doesn't matter. We're able to handle the tax remittance, and you can send a postal offering or not. It's totally up to you. So the express carriers, what are some of the fees with the express carriers going into?
It's status quo with a lot of other countries. You got the big ones. Now, one thing to note, into the UK, it's not a big, wide, vast country like you have in Australia and even in the US, where you have a lot of rural delivery area surcharges. There may be some, but I think you've got a lot more concentrated population. So that's not as big of a concern. But when it comes to the duty and tax fees, the carrier fees kick in when the carrier has to deal with the duty and taxes. So this is going to be shipments above 135 pounds. So all your low value shipments, you're remitting those. The carrier's not having to touch the money. There's not really any fees involved on the duty and tax piece. Now,
but the majority of our customers are impacted they're usually above the threshold. Like I think our average order value is usually in the 150 to 165
It's right around the
USD,
threshold.
and so it's pretty common that you're going to get hit with these fees.
Yep. And so when they do come in, it's again comes around that 12-pound range, or a percentage, usually around 2.5% of the duty and tax is what we typically see. Whichever
FedEx
one of those
is
is greater.
1275 GBP, and UPS is 1290 GBP.
Right.
Both are 2.5% of the duty and tax amount.
And in e-commerce, that percentage is it's usually not relevant because the value of the shipment's got to be really high. And the amount of duty and tax being assessed needs to be really high to exceed the 1275 threshold. So,
and there's an additional line item fee, which we've talked about carrier fees in another episode, worth the listen. That one goes into all the different fees that could apply, but it's 5 GBP with FedEx, which is probably going to be similar with UPS or a DHL when you go above the additional line items on the clearance.
Yeah, which is usually about 5 lines. So all that is it's more of a complex entry where they've got a ton of different. If you've got a ton of different commodities on a shipment, they're like, hey, this is more work for us to then process and clear. So they start charging you for each additional item over the first 5. And
as a reminder, or if you're a new listener, DHL is different because DHL will their fee is set on the origin. So in the US, it's 17 USD. In Australia, it's going to be a different number, and it's just the same, everywhere.
Yep, and that's on the disbursement fees, whereas the percentage of the duty and tax or the fixed amount, it's going to be the same no matter where you sell in the world. Whereas UPS and FedEx, it's going to vary based on where you're shipping to.
So, one of the things with this podcast is at the end, I'm always like, how do I Brexit this podcast today, Aaron? Because I think we've done a pretty good job at explaining what things were, before Brexit and how it's been impacted since. So I hope this was a fun episode for our listeners.
Absolutely. Sell to the UK. That's the message. And
absolutely. Well, you can do it. It does not need to be hard.
No, not at all.